on the okay. Speaker series on Lopez Island on climate change. And I was asked to speak about transportation, and they allowed me exactly 5 minutes to do so. So if I have 10 minutes in this framework, will have 5 minutes to answer your questions if you have them. So here goes. Good afternoon. My name is Henning Sehmsdorf, and I have farmed on Lopez Island for over half a century. But here I want to talk about something that concerns all of us, whether we are farmers or residents or visitors to the islands, and that is transportation and the impact that transportation has on climate change. And I want to speak on behalf of Transition Lopez Island, which is a cantankerous group of volunteers dedicated to engaging the community in transformational change for a livable future. So, according to the county greenhouse gas report from 2019, each person in the county produces approximately 18 megatons of CO2 emissions annually. The inventory also tells us that more than 2/3 of that output of greenhouse gas emissions comes from transportation, including off-road traction such as farm machinery, but mostly from passenger vehicles, light and heavy trucks, maritime vehicles, ferries and pleasure boats, and airplanes. Unfortunately, the county inventories do not break out the contribution of visitors, whether family, friends, tourists, or part-time residents, to the emission loads accrued by households. But of course, we all know that the visitors are here, and their numbers are ever increasing. According to the Visitors Bureau, last year, the islands saw an estimated 870,000 unique visitors, or 19,000 every day on an annualized basis, which is roughly 9% more than the permanent population. Mind you, I fully understand the contribution made by these visitors to the economy of the islands. In 2018, visitors spent more than $250 million in the county. 70% of all businesses derive trade from visitors, and 25% would not survive without the tourist trade. Almost 21% of all employment in the county is tourist-related. Of course, this does not mean that I have to like the negative impacts that the annualized doubling of the island's population by visitors has on the quality of my own life. Whether this means hours of waiting in line to catch a ferry to or from Anacortes, or not being able to find any parking at Iceberg Point, for example, or Watmau or Point Colville, or not finding a seat in a restaurant, and suffering surly service because businesses are chronically understaffed. And I may not like that food is advertised as local cuisine, while we all know that more than 90% of what people put on their plates in the islands is imported from the mainland on the very same heavy trucks that cause a large share of climate-changing pollution here in the islands. But while I may not like the ecological and cultural damage visitors bring to the islands, their numbers will likely increase over time, and there's probably little we can do about that. However, and this is the upshot of my presentation, we can do something about how visitors and residents travel to and from the islands and how they get around once they are here. In other words, we do have options to reduce the levels of emissions from transportation, which constitutes 2/3 of all climate-changing gases. To this end, Transition Lopez Island has undertaken a transportation survey under the heading, quote, "What would a fossil-free public transportation system on Lopez Island look like?" Frankly, the results of the survey are quite stunning. I will end my talk by summarizing some of the data we discovered. Not surprisingly, we found that 3/4 of residents and visitors travel by combustion engine vehicles, the rest by hybrids and EVs. However, we also found that more than 4 out of 10 travelers would be willing to leave their cars on the island or on the mainland, provided adequate transportation were available at their destinations. We found that a large portion of travelers promoted the idea of developing a circulating EV bus shuttle system in the islands, or on-demand transit like rideshare or taxi, and nearly half pleaded for safe and adequate biking lanes and walking trails. And by far the majority of respondents supported the idea that the county should take the initiative to develop, manage, and fund a pollution-free public transportation system in San Juan County. We conclude from these data that if the county wants to radically reduce emissions from transportation for the benefit of residents and visitors alike, and remediate climate change in our county, it is time for the development of a county-wide non-polluting public transit. We urge all of you to join us in taking the transportation survey, which you find by Googling, and the link is transitionlopezisland.org/public transit in the San Juans. Thank you. And if you have any questions about this very brief presentation, I would love to answer them to my best ability.
Great. Well, thank you, Henning.
For instance, I will ask a question that you're not asking me. On the islands, 25% either travel by hybrids or EVs, which is much higher than national average, which is about 9% of EVs on our roads. In comparison, in Norway, the number or the percentage of EVs on the road is 67%. And you might ask yourself how that is possible, the difference, 9% versus 67%. And the answer, very briefly, is that Norway has developed policies that shape what kind of cars are sold and bought. For instance, if you buy a combustion engine vehicle, you pay 100% tax on that vehicle. If you buy an EV, you do not. In cities like Oslo, they offer free parking and free charging for EVs coming into the city. None of that is offered to combustion engine vehicles. In other words, Norway enjoys the benefit of an enlightened population that votes in favor of such policy decisions. In the US, we leave all these decisions to private individuals and the free market. I just want to point out what the practical consequences are in terms of handling the challenge of climate change, which is largely due to transportation. Any other questions?